I like it packed, but 5 minutes are a real challenge, especially at 8 p.m. Here in Cologne. You know, the Sahara totals about the land area of the United States, and deserts, well, about 1/4 or 1/5 of the habitable continents. And I've been lucky to be a member of, for 40 years, of large-scale research projects from my student time to my retirement. And and having the opportunity to work in the Eastern Sahara, which is really more or less an ideal natural lab. So one of the major results was that in the last climate cycle, about 10,500 years ago, after the end of the Ice Age, the Sahara turned green when the global temperature had risen. And so, for example, in the Eastern Sahara, the vegetation zones and rainfall zones, of course, shifted north about 800 kilometers, 500 miles of where they are today. So that's how some places look in northwestern Sudan, and in a place where no scorpion can survive, you find bones like this. This is a Nile perch, 5 feet long, who lived there in a place with almost no rainfall. You also find pottery, or you find bones of cattle, which indicate that there was a sort of use of domestic cattle, which should have looked this place again almost without rain, like present-day Lake Chad. And the bones indicate that there was tens of species of freshwater fish and hippos, for example. So imagine the dramatic change which was occurring in the Sahara. And if you're lucky to find in some wadis, in some dry rivers, outcrops of fluvial deposits, and you're even luckier, you find the skeletons of drowned people. That means people drowned in a place where there's practically 20 millimeters of rainfall against a potential evaporation of 6,000 millimeters. So that's about how it looks today in the largest tributary to the Nile from the Sahara. And that's how it should have looked about 800,000 years ago. So we used at one side archaeological remains of prehistoric settlements in the Eastern Sahara, which taught us many things, but before all, as humans are very sensitive climate indicators, they were showing the evolution of the Eastern Sahara from a hyper-arid desert, which used to be much larger than today. Then within 500 years, it turned green. That stayed for a couple of millennia until there was the onset of slow desiccation, which also lasted until 2,000 years ago about, and that's the present day situation of the different rainfall zones. So that's more or less what I've said. So keep in mind that this drying of the Sahara not only triggered the emergence of the pharaonic civilization in the Nile Valley, but also it worked more or less as the motor of the evolution of the African continent to the present day. In another paper, we published the last 6,000 years of a core we took in an oasis. It's one of the last remaining lakes in the Sahara of the many thousands which used to exist. And this is, I would say, the most detailed climate archive for the past 11,000 years as well, which teaches us, for example, that there were events which were not climate driven, the so-called 8.2 event, which had as a consequence that there was a short-term cooling and a more or less a setback of the vegetation for several hundreds of years. Just to explain, a climate is a temperature is important thing, but even more important is rainfall. So beside this look back into the past, into the past, there we, of course, we also had observation during the 50 expeditions which we had. So, for example, places like this looked like this in the 1980s, and today they look like this in many places. That's really an indicator of drink. And there was one paper published already by my old friend Nicole Petimer in 1990 or something, important paper, unfortunately hardly noticed. And she raised for the first time, to my knowledge, a hypothesis that this slow or that anthropogenic warming might lead to a greenhouse effect. That means will green the Sahara. And if you tell such story today, you don't make many friends. For example, in these two newspapers, or the response I got afterwards, when you just mentioned that there's a trend towards a regreening, which is more or less for dry area. Of course, these are good news. Some modeling friends of mine, they had other ideas. They think it will not happen what happened before, but I would say it's not only orbital and CO2 control, but it's also the warming oceans. And the oceans, I would say, don't care whether they, by which causes they get warmer. But what we know is what was the basic hypothesis on a project which I coordinated in the 1990s, which showed, I don't know whether you can see the pointer, that of course warming oceans produce more water vapor, which is driven by an enhanced monsoon system far into the continent. And this is what might happen. And some other colleagues of mine, they made a rough calculation, and you can read, I don't have to read it, but which means that in case the entire Sahara and the entire Old World Desert Belt turns green again and is covered by vegetation, which we know for sure, which was the case 10,000 years ago, this might provide a gigantic carbon sequestration. And well, that's the idea. Might the greening of the world deserts compensate the entire anthropogenic carbon emission? Of course, this is not for tomorrow or for the next decades, but in a medium trend, this could happen. So I'm looking forward to any suggestion. Sorry for being too long.